Welcome back to Operation Overhaul, where we are overhauling a matchless G3L WD. There's a problem with the gearbox. Here's a reminder of what we're trying to cure. That over rev you heard there was the bike slipping out of second gear. If you haven't watched it yet, please dig out episode 2, where you'll see we stripped the gearbox down, pulled the gears out, put them on the bench, and discovered that the problem was these things, the selector forks. You can see that the one furthest away is really deeply ridged and shiny, and that's preventing an accurate selection of second gear. Happily for me, eBay came to the rescue, and for the princely sum of only 20 quid, I've got a new selector mechanism, so a new cam with 2 selector forks on it. And here we are unwrapping it with expectant excitement, and you know what? I can just swap them out and then crack on. 1 for 1. What a great solution. Okay, let's start putting everything back together. We'll start with the gearbox sprocket. So there's a thin washer that goes over here. Behind that is the grease seal, which stops the grease in the gearbox pouring over everything. Then we'll put on the sprocket itself with the bit that protrudes facing towards us, and that sits on the spline of the main shaft. Now I've got a little lock washer that goes over here so that when we put the nut on it, you can fold the ends over to hold the nut in place. I've got this from AMC Classic Spares. It's just a little bit too small to go over there, so we're going to have to file it down a bit. And with the inner diameter opened out a little bit, it'll now fit over nicely, and we can put the sprocket nut on, although we only need to do it up finger tight at this stage. Now to the other side of the bike, where we can refit the cam pawl over its little axle here and put the nut on. Okay, here's the gears all ready to go back together. So we've got the lay shaft here. This is the main shaft gears, and the main shaft itself will fit through later. This is third gear, which we're just going to pop on the end of the main shaft at a later time. You've got the cam here and the fork selectors. The lower selector goes to the lay shaft, lower to lay. The upper selector goes onto the main shaft here, and the lay shaft fork selector goes into the sliding gear there. We've got a washer here as well that will pop on at the end. For a detailed explanation of how to put this together, including the numbers that you will see on the gears and exactly how they go on, then do what I did, which is refer to a video that I made earlier where I go through it in really step-by-step instructions. And fit that gear inside it. There you go, that's what I used, and nothing's changed since I put that together, and I've done thousands of miles with the gearbox put back together that way. Okay, before I put the gears in, I'm just going to clean up the face, ready to take the gasket. I'm going to do that with a brass brush. It's just a little bit easier before you put the gears in because they'll sort of protrude out a little bit once you go in, and it's difficult to get around with a brush. Now we take the gear cluster as a single unit and then push them in and try and find the holes at the end of the gear shell so that everything goes in. It's a pretty tight fit in there. It does resemble gynecology to a certain extent, but after a little bit of practice you'll be able to push it in, no dramas. Right, now we'll push the main shaft in from the other side, and that will come through here. Right, now we're going to put our washer over the lay shaft, and then third gear, which is the only one we've got left, that's going to go over the main shaft. That should slot into the one that's already on there. Yep, that's engaging. Good. Now you notice the lay shaft is sitting a bit low because it's not sort of held yet, as is everything really. But once we get the main case on and get those into their bushes, everything will tighten up. What we need to do now is make sure that this marker here on the cam it's at the 9 o'clock, like that. Now when you've got all of this in, this washer that you've put on the end here, you should have that shoulder of the shaft there, so the washer goes on there. If it's not, you can't see a shoulder like that, then you haven't got the gears in far enough. And the cam here is going to sit not in a notch but on a flat bit here when this is in the 9 o'clock position. If that cam is sitting on that sort of bronze outer bit, then you haven't got that in far enough. So there's just a couple of sort of indicators there if things haven't gone as well as they might. But that's all in good position now. Now what we've got to do is this cam here, this pull rather, all it does is it sits against spring tension into these notches here. And to do that, the spring goes up through here, and you've got like a grub screw that comes underneath. And this is really quite important because this can be a cause of bikes jumping out of gear if it's not done up tightly enough. But it's awkward to get to because you've got to come between an oil pipe and the frame, and the spring is quite strong. You don't want to cross thread it, blah blah blah. Now to put the gasket on. Now these are pretty delicate, and if you find that the studs only just fit through the holes and there's a danger of ripping it, there's nothing wrong with getting one of those little hole punchers that you would put holes in paper for when you're filing stuff, and just enlarge the holes a little bit. It won't contribute to any grease leaking out. It might just save you tearing the gasket if you can make the holes a little bit bigger. You may also find that the gasket's a bit floppy when it's on the gearbox shell, so a judicious couple of spots of grease here and there will just help it to adhere. And again, when you put the next part of the case on, that might just stop you crimping it or tearing it. Now to put the gearbox outer casing on, and I'm just using a couple of zip ties here to loop around the bottom of the lay shaft because it sags down quite a lot before it's located in its bush. And so I can just use this just to lift it slightly as I put the gearbox outer case on and just help me to locate it. And then once it's safely in, I'll just cut the zip tie and pull it out of the way. Now we'll reattach the little washers and nuts that hold the gearbox inner casing into place. Now we'll reassemble the kickstart pinion. First of all, there's a small washer which protects the spring which is going to come on next. That goes over a little cylinder, and then you've got the kickstart pinion and then the nut that goes on the end of that. And it's quite obvious how they mesh in. They've got like a serrated base to them. So that all goes in, can only go in one way really. And then we'll secure that with a nut on the end, and you need to hang on to the end of the main shaft with your other hand in order to tighten it. I'll get it finger tight, but to help us to nip it up properly, it helps if you put the clutch basket on at the other side. Just put it over its splines because you're going to use this as something to grip against. Put a little bit of cloth around it to protect your fingers, and then you can get on with a wrench on the other side and tighten that as much as you can. Then we'll put the second gasket on using the same technique we used for the first one. Now we'll put the clutch rod, it doesn't matter which way round it goes, into the centre of the main shaft. Then you'll have a ball bearing to press in on the other side in the centre of that kickstart pinion. My setup has 2 ball bearings, not quite sure why, but 2 seems to work, so 2 it is. Next, there's a small fork arrangement which goes into the end of the main shaft and kickstart pinion, and this is going to locate to the clutch lever arm when we put on the outer case. Now we'll put the gear selector ratchet on. This has got a little datum mark, and that must line up with the one that's on the end of the cam that we put in the 9 o'clock. If those two dots are opposite each other, then you're good. Now this is the bit that can seem a bit tricky, so I'm going to play this in real time and try and do it relatively slowly in terms of explanation. So we put the gear selector box into the kickstart case. It all lines up with little slots and studs and things. We're going to put the gear selector pedal over the end of its spline, and that's just to help us keep a grip on things. You'll remember that I'd wound up the kickstart 2 full turns, and then it was secured by a zip tie. I've taken that away, so I'm just holding the spring tension with my hands. And now we offer up the whole arrangement to the gearbox, try and line everything up. So that's the studs, the gear selector where it goes into its hole, the kickstarter where it meshes with its gear. You can see it all if you look through the grease filler case and through the crack at the top. And we just try and line everything up so it goes in. You've also got the clutch mechanism, which is just peeping out the top of the gearbox filler, and that needs to go over its selector as well. And once it all lines up, it kind of feels right, and you just sort of gently wiggle it on. I might look like a bit of a gearbox god here, but this is the 3rd attempt to do it. And you've just got to be a little bit patient. If something moves ever so slightly out of place, and just take the whole thing off, have a cup of tea if you're feeling a bit irate, and then go back to it. It will all fit in if you're patient and you're gentle. This is how that clutch lever arm locates into the fork that we put on the end of the main shaft. Now all we've got to do is do up the outer nuts and then reposition the gear lever. That should be easy, shouldn't it? Problem is, these old bikes, they've got a habit of kicking you in the arse if you get overconfident. Oh, bollocks. Okay, so it's the end of a long day and I seem to have broken that stud. Looking at the length of it, if I'm, let me take this off, if I'm lucky, it might be visible and I might be able to get it out with mole grips and just literally put another stud in there. Anyway, worst things happen at sea. The important thing is I think to stop working tonight so I don't break anything else. But I'll just take this off, put it away safe, and let's just assess the damage, and then we know what we've got to buy tomorrow in order to carry on. Alrighty, let's get the slot off. Alright, off we come. Taking care that we don't damage that gasket, because I don't want to buy another one. Alright, that's our broken stud. Okay, so let's take the gasket off. Let's see if we can get this bugger out. Phew. Well, that's good. Well, at least that isn't done. And now all we need is this stud replacing. Ah, well, there's always an upside. And on this occasion, I get to spend some time with my good mate Gary. We're onto the stud now with a thread gauge to try and work out what kind of thread it is. It turns out it's metric. It's an M6. So next, with a tap, he goes into the thread and just cleans it up a little bit, and this also confirms the size.
Always a risk of breaking a tap off in it, of course, but
yeah,
that actually feels like quite a decent thread in there.
Yeah, Now Gary gets a bit of blank steel rod from which he's going to make the stud, and he trims it down a little bit before putting a thread on it, and also puts a chamfer on the end. Then Gary prepares the die to go on the lathe, and the intention here is he's just going to use the lathe to keep everything straight. He's going to turn it by hand. A bit of grease goes on the rod just to help it cut. He makes sure everything's straight, and then he starts to wind on the thread. Once Gary's happy with the first thread, he cuts the rod and then repeats the process on the opposite side. Then Gary removes the new stud from the lathe and fits it into the gearbox outer case.
So not too big at all, is it?
That's perfect. Okay, broken stud fixed, gearbox back together. Not lubricated yet, but let's just have a gentle test and see if the gearbox operates. So let's just, we don't want that now, do we? Let's put it up here a little bit higher. So let's see if we can go up for first. Oh, let's see if we can go down for second. Yeah, third. Oh, that seems a bit stiff. One more. Yeah, and it's down. Okay. Up, up, up. Okay, that's first. Neutral. Second. Third. Fourth. Shouldn't go any further. Third. Second. Neutral. And first. Lovely. Let's leave it in neutral. Hallelujah. Okay, now just as the actress said to the bishop, we need to get some lubricant in this box. Penrite semi-fluid grease is what we need. I don't have quite enough. I'm about a cupful short, but I'm going to put in what I've got. I found a company online not too far away. They have some in stock, so I've ordered some, and then that should arrive hopefully the day before the ride, which is 3 days away. I try and put it in with a syringe. That's usually the best way, and let's hope the new stuff arrives in time. Time to reconnect the clutch now. So that comes in from the back of the gearbox. It just screws in, the cable goes through the middle of the screw attachment, and then we'll hook it over the little claw in the middle of the gearbox. That little adjuster there is for fine adjustment of the gearbox. This bit that I'm circling here is for coarse adjustment. We'll get to that when we test ride the bike, hopefully, and we'll make sure that the clutch is just where it needs to be. And finally, for this episode, I've got a brand new cap for the gearbox. The old one was just getting a little bit too worn. This is ever so shiny. It's going to look a little bit out of place. It'll be easier to get on and off. Okay, that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was of some use. Time getting short now. 3 days to go. I really do need to be on this VMCC ride. Will I make it? Ooh, it's starting to look a little bit dodgy, isn't it? But I'll do my best. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. Ride safely. See you next time.